Hello everyone and welcome back to Bitwig Studio and Music Production. This is lesson 3.32, and in this lesson we're going to begin our little foray into our frequency-based effects that come bundled with Bitwig Studio. And we're going to begin with the most logical of all these effects, which is the filter. We've already talked about filtering a number of different times and in a number of different contexts, but let's finally just put the nail straight through the board here and dive into Bitwig Studio's filter. So one thing you probably noticed before was with some of our effects that we've already talked about, specifically like the delay 2, we had access to a high cut and a low cut filter. And like a lot of parameters in here, Bitwig will a lot of times give you little hints as to what these things are going to do. And in the case of the delay, when we have a signal and it is delayed out, we had control over the frequency spectrum of those delays. So if we were to, for example, delay this chord, let's see if we can dial in a nice little setting here. Let's go 3 and 5 and just see what we can get. When I have my filters disengaged, which the way to disengage these filters is to just pull the low cut all the way down and pull the high cut all the way up, we're getting exact replications of that original raw signal minus any phasing that's occurring, which of course, once you start introducing delays, you are going to start introducing some phase. But once we start to pull these filters down and pull this filter up, we're going to get some frequency changes in the delayed signal. So let's actually take a look at that here. We can just show you. So here it is with the filters all the way up. Turn the mix up a little bit. And now let's see what happens if I really pull this high cut and low cut. Introduce these quite a bit. You can hear just how much more dull the sound, the delay sound, becomes. Now the question would be, well, what if with this chord, I don't want to just have access to filtering out the delays. I actually want to filter the signal itself. The way you're going to do that is with this very basic filter device. And like always, don't forget you can just add any of these effects by clicking the plus button and selecting what you want. So if we bring in a new filter here, this is what we have as a default. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change our pre and post. These are like level controls here. So when the signal is coming in, by default, it's actually decreasing the signal by 6 dB. And that's mainly because when we start messing around with this resonance control and boosting this up, we can actually add quite a bit of level. And so that's something to be aware of. But for right now, I'm going to go to 0 so that we can actually hear pre and post exactly what's going on without any additional level changes. The next thing I'm going to do is pull down this resonance, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And let's focus on our different filter types, which you can see here on the left. And these images are exactly what's going to happen. So the filter is going to correspond to our frequency content over here, which we have on this band. So when we play this chord normally without any filtering going on, you can see what it looks like on the spectrum. And now with some filtering, okay, pretty obvious to hear the differences there. This first filter we have would be called I always get these mixed up for some reason. I've been doing this for a long time and I always have to like really sit here and think about it. This is our low pass filter, meaning that as we pull down the cutoff here, our lows are going to still be able to pass through and we're going to be cutting out the high frequencies. So you can call it a high cut or low pass. I'm sure as time goes on, I'm going to mix those up a number of times, but it's all about the sound. It's all about just connecting this image to our frequency spectrum over here. So as I pull this down, we can watch and see what happens. Pretty obvious, right? We have another version of this filter, which is going to have a steeper cutoff. So right now we can hear, and we can even see when we pull this down, that we're having a pretty smooth point of cutoff, a pretty smooth slope as we pull this cutoff down. With this times 4, we're actually increasing the slope fourfold. And so I think normally that's something like 48 decibels per octave, and this is something like 6 or 8 decibels per octave. It's not that important. It's all about hearing it and hearing the differences. So we can go and punch in this more extreme version. We'll just listen to the two differences, and you'll even be able to see what's happening. Let's pull this down a little more. Listen to one more time. And now the steeper variation. You can see we lose some of those extra high harmonics and higher partials. Okay, the next filter type is the band pass, and just like the picture is going to indicate, we have a low pass and a high pass filter working together in series, and we can hear what this sounds like. We can scoop around here. And then we have a steeper model of this as well. All right, next we have our low cut filters, and our low cut filters are going to do exactly what they sound like. If we pull the cutoff all the way down to the left now, we're going to have the full signal. And as we pull this up, we're going to be cutting out lower frequencies up to higher frequencies left to right. And again, a steeper model. And last but not least, we have the notch filter. This one's a little bit more subtle, but when it comes to complex sound design and sound manipulation, I tend to use notch filters all the time just to add that little bit extra movement without really impacting the frequency spectrum too much. So this is just a bandpass flipped around in reverse. And you can see where that cut is occurring very easily. So I really like to use that one, especially when I boost the resonance up. And let's talk about what resonance is next. Resonance is just going to add a peak to your cutoff point. And this is a very familiar sound to many of you. A lot of those 303 based sounds use filters with a lot of resonance. It gives it that sort of like womp womp sort of sound to it. I don't really know how to explain it. We just have to listen to it. So I'm going to boost the resonance up here, and we can take a listen, and we can even watch and see what happens at that point. So we're at about 1K here, and just watch the 1K point as I boost this resonance up. And again, we're back to the high cut filter here. All right, now listen as we add some movement here. And then if we actually increase the slope, it's going to become even more obvious, the movement especially. And here's where you can start to get into trouble with your volume, because if you add a lot of resonance, you're actually going to be adding some dBs. So do be aware of that and always be watching your meters. The resonance actually kind of works the opposite way when we're talking about the bandpass and the notch filters. So when our resonance is all the way down to 0, we're going to have the widest range of frequencies being impacted. So if I again go back to about 1K, we can take a listen and see how much of the frequency spectrum is being impacted here. Now as I boost this, it's going to actually become more and more narrower range, and you're going to see the 1K point really start to go up there. You'll really hear it when we even make that slope steeper. Same thing with the notch. Watch this 1K area here. All right, so that's pretty much what the filter is all about. Now, a lot of you would be asking, well, what are some practical uses of the filter? And the truth is, you're going to find filters on almost everything. Now, when it comes to electronic music and specifically electronic dance music, filters like this are used a lot of times on every single audio track you have. And typically, people will use the high cut. Or is it low cut? I don't know. They'll use this side of the filter here. And what they're going to do is they're going to bring this like almost all the way down. So somewhere in like the 30-40 range, because you want to leave room for your sub bass. And a lot of times people know that's what you want to do, but they don't understand why. We actually understand why already, because we know that lower frequencies, things in the 20, 30, 40, they are physically larger sound waves. Now, remember, every single thing is vibrating. It's just not everything around us is vibrating at a speed in which we can actually hear it. So if you record something, especially if you're using like one of those handheld recorders, a lot of times you're going to pick up wind or you're going to pick up this low rumble. And so there's going to be frequency content down here, like in 20s, even below the range of human hearing. And our speakers, they're designed to produce sound that we can hear 20 to 20K, 20 hertz to 20,000 kilohertz. But that doesn't always work that way. So the speaker is still going to try to reproduce frequencies that are even below our range of human hearing. And there's an issue with that, because now the speakers, and specifically the woofer and the speaker, the cone is working so hard to try to generate these frequencies that we can't even hear. So you always want your speakers to be working as practically and as logically as possible. And so if you're in a huge club or something, you don't want all of your sounds producing these sub-bass frequencies, because those are the biggest frequencies. Those are the ones that push and pull the cone farthest in and out. And so you can start to really muddy up a mix if you don't take one of these filters and start to cut out that stuff, that junk that you don't actually need. And you'll hear that done a lot on snares. I think this snare sound already probably had some filtering applied to it. But even so, we could take our filter here, apply the filter, and start to do some cutoff. Maybe even up in the 100 range. It's not really impacting the sound too much. So you can hear that I've cut nearly up to 300 hertz, and it's impacted the sound a little bit, but a lot of times that's what you want, because it's going to give it that room to cut through and play nicely with the kick drum. Also in music, always remember when we talk about any one of these effects, and when we talk about everything, I want you to think about it on the two different levels. So the very micro level and then a macro level as a whole. So how would a filter be used in an arrangement? A very common usage of a filter is, let's say you have a kick drum playing all the way through your track, and then you go into a breakdown. And so you want to remove the kick, but you want to slowly bring it back in. You want to remove that low end energy, but as we start to get closer and closer to, I don't know, the super high energy section, I don't remember what they call it in EDM, what you could do is take the cutoff here on our low cut filter, which is what we're on right now, high pass, pull it all the way up. And as that section is progressing through, slowly pull the cutoff back and start to let that kick come in. So if we're doing that with this drum sound, you'll hear what I mean. And over like an 8 bar, 16 bar phrase, we'll start to pull this back in, add that energy. We'll probably hold it here for a second, and then it'll be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then at a certain point, when the new section comes in, drop it all in. And here's a good example of something that really does need a little bit of filtering here, because we have all this energy happening, and it's happening below our range of human hearing. So I could take the cutoff here, pull it up a bit, and actually what's occurring there as we put this in, we're actually gaining level, because this junk down here is phasing and canceling some stuff out. So we're making our speakers that much more efficient. And if you really listen closely, you'll hear that we gain level despite cutting out frequencies. Listen to the low end, listen to the kick, listen to how this is brought out. So really there are just hundreds and hundreds of uses for these filters. And if you've ever worked with synthesis, you obviously know the importance of using filters and movement with filters especially. So for example, if we are in our other view here, let's tab over, and we grab this chord sound, drop it in here, play back to the arrangement. Let's get rid of that. Go into our automation, select our cutoff. You can take our filter. I'm on the low pass right now. I want to get to the cutoff. I'm going to pull this all the way up, and just over time here, I'll drag this down. That's probably a little extreme, and we can even increase the resonance over time too, so we'll get a real sense for this filter movement here. If we want, we can get a little fancy. You can see how we're going to the reds momentarily when we start to add in all that resonance. The very last thing I want to point out is with the resonance control. So on old classic analog filters and with digital filters too, there is a feedback circuit that goes on inside of the filter. And the feedback circuit can really start to get overdriven and pushed into what's referred to as self-oscillation. Instead of just saying the term, I'll let you guys listen to it and actually hear what I'm talking about. If I take this chord device here and I play it back, whoops, pull up the spectrum, play this back. Let's put this again to about 1K. Listen to what happens when we pull the resonance all the way up. You hear that high-pitched ringing sound? That is self-oscillation. The filter itself is actually oscillating at this 1K point, and we could change it around. You can see when we're on this steeper mold, we're actually getting harmonics to pop up as well with the self-oscillation, which is pretty crazy. Check that out. So that's pretty crazy, and that's why a filter isn't just always necessarily a corrective tool. It can be used in the context like this, where you can actually set it into self-oscillation, and sometimes that's a lot of fun to play around with. Most of the time, you're not going to find a practical usage for that, but it is something to be familiar with. So just to recap the filter as a whole, what we have are different types of filters: high pass, low pass, band pass, notch filters in the case here with Bitwig Studio, and then you have access to a cutoff parameter, a resonance control, and the filter can be used in a number of different ways. It can be used in the context of a whole arrangement. So if you're trying to gradually pull in and out certain frequencies, which remember, we only have a limited amount of range and a limited amount of space up and down. So at times you might need to take one of your strong leads and really filter it to give it room in the mix. If you want to then emphasize maybe a pad part, or you want to really emphasize the bass at a certain moment, you can use filters to help you accomplish that. And then you can also use filters on a much more micro scale. So within just a chord or something, you can pull the filter and have it move around a little bit. As we get further, we'll talk about how we have access to some modulators which will control that for us. But for now, obviously, you have to jump into the automation controls and move the filter cutoff and resonance points as you see fit. So I hope that was helpful for you guys. I hope maybe you learned something a little bit new. Again, I apologize. I always struggle with the difference in the nomenclature between high pass and low pass. But once you get used to working with this, the names really don't matter. It's just about hearing the sounds and knowing what's going to happen when you're on this filter type as compared to this one. So thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you again in the next lesson.